Good afternoon. Welcome to today's TASA webinar, Critical Issues Surrounding Railroad Crossing Accidents. A highway rail grade crossing is a location where a public highway, road, street, or private roadway, including associated sidewalks and pathways, crosses one or more railroad tracks at grade. There are 222,002 railroad crossings in the United States, of which 137,359 cross public roads. A collision between a train and a motorist at a grade crossing occurs approximately every 2 hours. Half of the crossing accidents happen where there are active warning devices, and more than 60% of accidents occur where train speed is less than 40 miles an hour. Approximately 20% of the accidents involve cars running into trains. During this afternoon's program, our presenter will cover the following: components of a grade crossing, design considerations, and warning systems. The presenter for today's webinar is Dr. Carl Berkowitz. Dr. Berkowitz has 48 years of transportation and traffic engineering experience. He has served as a litigation consultant and held various positions in industry, government, and higher education, with extensive experience in planning, design, safety, security, construction, maintenance, operations, and management. He holds a BCE in civil engineering and an MBA in industrial management from the City College of New York, and an MS in transportation planning and a PhD in transportation planning and engineering from the Polytechnic Institute, NYU Poly. In addition to his work involving pedestrians and virtually every form of transportation and its safety, including aviation and maritime, Dr. Berkowitz has written numerous reports and articles for major publications, chaired task forces, appeared on national television and radio, and made numerous scholarly presentations worldwide. He holds memberships in many transportation professional associations. Dr. Berkowitz's areas of expertise include accident studies, slips, trips, and falls, pedestrian accidents, perception reaction capabilities, subway and commuter rail accidents, speed and distance analysis, and railroad grade crossings. If you have a question that pertains to the presentation, Dr. Berkowitz has asked that you use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, which are found on the right-hand side of the screen, to submit your question to him, and he'll do his best to answer it during the presentation. Tomorrow morning, I will send out a link to the archived recording of this webinar, and we do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after the webinar is over. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm going to turn our presentation over to our distinguished presenter, Dr. Carl Berkowitz. Dr. Berkowitz, the presentation is all yours.
Thank you very much, Matt. Let's get started. As you mentioned, the topics we're going to cover are the components of grade crossing, design considerations, and the solutions, hopefully. Today, you can't help but pick up a newspaper and find an article about some kind of train accident. And just in this slide is a sampling of some of the train accidents that have appeared in the newspapers over the last couple of years. These are primarily centered in California, Florida, Illinois, but these can be found all over the United States. Train collisions are a problem, and the interesting thing is, over the years, we've increased the use of signs, gates, warning systems. We also have done a lot of work on avoiding collisions, system delays, and infrastructure damages have been the result, even though we've made a concerted effort to try to improve the safety at the crossings. And as attorneys, you know that the result of the collisions are property damage, medical, and legal expenses. In the United States, the total number of crossings has been reduced dramatically over the last 100 years. Today, there's about 222,000 crossings, of which 137,000 are what we call public crossings, and the remainder are private crossings. Those are crossings that are on private property and are managed and handled by private landowners. Some of the safety issues that we see concerning railroad grade crossings in the United States. We see drivers driving around gates. We see vehicles racing the train. We see vehicles getting trapped on the tracks, stalled vehicles. We had experiences with vehicles and pedestrians not looking for a second train. One train passes and a second train in the other direction behind that train, and they don't see the train. Not expecting a train at any time at a crossing, that sense of complacency. And we have to bear in mind that trains can't stop quickly, and not all crossings are at designated locations. In terms of pedestrians, we see that pedestrians have a habit of walking on railroad property and not crossing the tracks at designated locations, and sometimes crossing the tracks immediately after a train passes and not being aware of a second train coming in the other direction. Also, pedestrians feel that they're invulnerable and walk around or behind a lowered crossing gate. These are some of the safety issues that we will be discussing. Some of the root causes of accidents at railroad crossings are the crossing hardware, the vehicle itself, the visibility of the crossing, the geometry of the crossing, the design of where the crossing and the highway or the pedestrian path cross each other, the sight distance or the sight line between someone crossing the tracks and the train that is approaching, how conspicuous the train itself is, any obstructions to the view of a train coming to a crossing, the number of tracks at a crossing, how flat the roadway is that crosses the tracks, and the basic condition. As you can see from the top picture here, this is a public crossing, and you can see that it's in pretty poor condition. Crossing accidents occur every 2 hours. Motorists are 40 times more likely to be killed in a vehicle railroad accident. Half of the accidents occur where there are active warning devices, and more than 50% of the accidents occur where train speeds are less than 40 miles an hour. Approximately 20% of accidents involve cars running into trains, as Matt mentioned earlier. Over the last 30 years, accidents have declined, and this can be attributed to improvements to crossings, but even more so to the reduction in the number of crossings. There have been many crossings that have been closed or eliminated, and a lot of crossings have now gates across the crossing. But the percentage of reduction in the number of accidents is somewhat related to the consolidation and the reduction of crossings themselves. The leading accident causes, somewhat in the order of severity or rate of happening, heading the list is drug and alcohol use, inattentiveness of either the vehicle, pedestrian, or even the train operator, misjudgment on the part of any of the players, traffic violations, a vehicle unable to stop or a train unable to stop, disregarding signals both of vehicles, pedestrians, and of trains, vehicles and pedestrians unaware of a train, environmental factors such as rain or snow, and on occasion the warning system not operating in a proper manner. Here's a look of the 7-year history through 2009, and you can see the decline in the number of accidents since 2003 to 2009, and including the reduction in the number of deaths that have occurred in recent years, as well as serious injuries. The warning systems that exist at public locations, railroad crossing locations, as you can see, crossbucks are the leading indicator, followed by gates, flashing lights, stop signs, and other passive and other active devices. Pedestrian incidents have been somewhat stable over the last several years. Since 2007 to July of 2010, 484 pedestrians have been killed in railroad incidents. Some of these accidents or incidents can be attributed to just the way pedestrians behave at crossings. For example, pedestrians rather than looking to the right or the left or ahead, tend to look down and not up. And pedestrians have a tendency to become distracted and lack a sense of awareness of what's taking place. And as you can see in the top picture, pedestrians tend to create their own pathways because it's more convenient to take a pathway other than the designated pathway because it tends to save time and because it tends to be the shortest route between 2 points. And this needs to be kept in mind in designing pedestrian crossings, that pedestrians will not always take the designated crossing if there's a more convenient crossing. There are various participants in accidents, and we can break them down to the railroad participants and the highway participants. In terms of the railroad participants, we have the train, the tracks, the warning systems, and the train operator, him or herself. And on the highway, we have the driver, the vehicle, the roadway information systems, the pedestrian, as being accident participants. The railroad has primary responsibility for the signage, the crosstalk sign, or the flashing light signal, and the gate mechanism at the crossing. The government, through the highway departments, have general responsibility for the advanced warning signals, the markings, and the supplemental signs that we find at and near railroad crossings. The government and railroads are not the only ones with responsibilities. Drivers and pedestrians also have important responsibilities, and their responsibilities are to obey the traffic laws, rules, and the warning devices that are placed at the crossings. And this, in order for the driver and the pedestrian to be able to understand what's taking place at the crossing, they also require certain information so that they can make a safe decision. And the decision process is really a very simple one. And this is the basic decision model that a vehicle operator or pedestrian would follow. They would look at the crossing and determine the time to arrival of the train. This decision is taken out of their hands if there is a controlled crossing with gates. And then they have to decide the time to cross or not to cross. And they also need to know the time to complete the crossing. One of the problems that both vehicle operators and pedestrians have is they have a lot of misconceptions about trains and the operations of trains. They believe that trains always can stop quickly, like an automobile, and they run on predictable schedules. They're always on time, and you can always see or hear a train when it's approaching a crossing. And when there's a passive crossing warning device and not a signal or a gate, that there's negligible traffic and hardly a train will pass that crossing. And lastly, the misconception is that they see a large object and that they understand what the large object is doing. But really there's a visual illusion. Judging arrival is a very serious matter. For one to detect the speed or time of a collision, we have many studies that have been conducted, and it shows that we have a difficult time in judging that arrival time to a crossing. Basically, human vision underestimates the speed of large objects. A researcher by the name of Berkowitz, back in 1985, hypothesized that based on information that he gathered from train operators and others, drivers look at a train that is approaching, and they tend to misjudge the speed that train is traveling at. And he hypothesized, this is without research, he hypothesized that this misjudgment is a result of human vision system, that the human vision system tends to underestimate the speed of large objects. And we've all experienced this phenomenon when we see when we drive near airports and we see large planes overhead, and they seem to not be moving at all or moving very slowly. And that small planes seem to be moving a lot faster. So we have that experience of large objects and their rate of speed. As I mentioned, Dr. Leibowitz did everything intuitively. In 2003, two researchers undertook a research project to determine whether or not his hypothesis was correct, and they, through experimental trials, confirmed the Leibowitz hypothesis. In 2006, further research was done, and they found that large and fast-running trains seemed smaller and slower, while the distance of the train by the person observing was correctly perceived. And we only wish that if we're crossing a crossing, as the little cartoon shows, that the track just goes up and the train goes over and we go safely under. Just think about it, these long freight trains that you've seen. They can be carrying as much as 12 million pounds. And at 55 miles per hour, that train would take 18 football fields to make a stop. And the history of railroading in the United States, going back to the very beginning, the early 1800s, it's been accepted that the train has the right of way and everybody else has to stop and wait. And this has been the practice in the United States for over almost 180 years. If we wanted to determine the train stopping distance, that would be the distance traveled between the time a vehicle or pedestrian is detected by the train and when the emergency brakes are applied, and the distance required to bring the train to a full stop. That's the train stopping distance. And as I mentioned before, the freight train, that would take 18 football fields to stop. Smaller trains, of course, would take a shorter distance. The time to stop the train can be calculated from information about the train's braking, deceleration, and the reaction time of the train operator. If we have those two pieces of information, we are able to calculate the time to stop the train. When one is approaching a crossing, it's important that the vehicle operator or the pedestrian recognize that there is a crossing ahead, and to begin the process to search for a train or a signal. And this enables the vehicle or the pedestrian or the bicycles even to decide the proper course of action. And they have to reach a point before the crossing where they have to make the decision whether to stop or to proceed across the crossing. It looks like we have a question from Jonathan Bullock. If he knows who the authority that governs the maximum speed of trains as they proceed through an intersection. The speed of tracks are determined by FRA standards. Each type of track is given a different classification. Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Class 5. And if the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, classifies that track as a Class 1, for example, that says that a passenger train can operate at 70 miles an hour and a freight train at 60 miles an hour. If the train has a different classification, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the classification, the speeds are reduced for those particular tracks. In addition to that, there may be geometric considerations, even on a Class 1 track or any class track, where there are curves or anything. If you saw the movie Unstoppable, there was the train tracks were 60 miles an hour, but there was a sharp curve in Pennsylvania City where the speed of the train had to be reduced to 15 miles per hour. So that's when the speed has to be reduced, it's usually posted, and it's posted by the railroad. I hope that answers that question. One of the things to keep in mind when trying to cross a track is that there's a certain clearance distance that's required, and that clearance distance is demonstrated in this slide, that the clearance distance is between one set of gates and another set of gates, and of course the angle that the track crosses the roadway will determine this track clearance distance. Of course the shortest distance is when it's at a 90-degree angle, but when it's on an acute or an obtuse angle, you can see how the distance increases. And we sort of tend to refer to that area as the hazard zone, an area where stopped or approaching vehicles will collide with approaching or stopped train if they fall within that zone. I think that we want to take a moment now to stop for questions, Matt.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Dr. Berkowitz, we do have a question here. What constitutes an unsafe crossing?
This is a slippery slope. One of the things that one has to bear in mind is that the federal government in I guess it was the 1960s, created the Federal Railroad Administration, which implemented various regulations. And in these various regulations, they specified that the federal regulation preempts local and state regulations, including common law. And if the crossing does not meet the requirements of the Federal Railroad Administration, and if the Federal Railroad Administration or the government hasn't enacted any laws that relate to the crossing, then what would be declared as unsafe would be some of the laws of the states, and those primarily fall on the type of materials that are used at the crossings, whether the signaling systems or the signs, the signal systems are functioning, or the signs are in place and haven't fallen down. The geometry, does the crossing happen at a level plane? Is there a hump on top between where the highway and the railroad crosses? But coming back to the question, it's kind of very complicated. Even though we might consider it unsafe, the Federal Railroad Safety Act and subsequent laws and preemptions that were created can make an unsafe condition safe. I know that's sort of a roundabout answer, but that's what the condition is right now.
Okay, and here's a follow-up question to that. Is the safety of a crossing surface and crossing design affected by federal preemption?
I would say that if you work with an expert at the early stages of a complaint, that would not be preempted. Depends on how you draft your complaint and how you go about your discovery.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions in the queue, so we should probably move forward with the presentation of content. For all those in attendance who may have a question, as you see, Dr. Berkowitz is more than comfortable answering questions on the fly. So if a question does come to your mind, just insert it or just type it into the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we'll answer it as quickly as we can. So thank you so much for your questions, and Dr. Berkowitz, please continue on with the presentation.
Thank you very much. One of the things to keep in mind is when a pedestrian, a vehicle, or a bicyclist come to an intersection, they have a limitation in what they can see, and that's what basically it's the vision that we have and the peripheral vision. And you can see that our focal vision is only about 15%, and the peripheral vision is 75%, and is not the most dependable vision when coming to a railroad crossing. And this is just a little diagram showing that what the observer has to see coming to a crossing, and as they come closer and closer, what the angle is of vision. And you can see how dangerous it becomes as you get closer and closer to the track. If you want to see 290 feet down the track, you almost have to turn your head, literally, to see what's happening. And that's not a very good situation. Sight distance is very important. These are one of the areas where preemption may not play a role. There's a lot of work that's been done on this where there are tables which I will show you. Well, this is an example of a train and a vehicle approaching the same crossing, and the visibility triangle. And there are tables that have been developed by the federal government and AASHTO and some of the states. And this is a table that shows what the train speed and the highway speed and what distance you need to avoid a collision at a crossing. These are just guidelines, but you can see the amount of distance that you need if a vehicle is going fast and the train is going fast, how many feet you need in order to have a safe crossing. One of the two cases, one case that we should look at in terms of sight distance, and that's where the train is down the track and the driver stops at the crossing, must be able to see, in this case the driver is at a stop line and must be able to see far enough down the track to determine if there's sufficient time to cross over to the other side of the track to that area that's shown as L before the train arrives at the crossing. And of course, this depends on the train speed and the acceleration capability of the motor vehicle. And this is especially important at crossings where there are no gates. A second sight condition is drivers approaching a crossing and need to be able to see the approaching train in sufficient time to be able to stop at least 15 feet before the rail crossing. So you need an appropriate sight distance without obstruction so that you can stop safely. And of course, this sight distance is based on roadway and train speed. And this is, again, critical of passive crossing. And this is from the Washington State Design Manual for Crossing. And this is just a table that shows you the relationships between vehicle speed and train speed for those two different cases and what should be the minimum sight distance in order to be able to cross safely. Just to give you a feeling for speed and time, if a vehicle or a train is going 10 miles an hour, in 1 second, that vehicle has moved 15 feet. In 3 seconds, it's moved 44 feet. And at 10 miles an hour, 200 feet is accomplished in 13 seconds. But if you multiply that by 7, and to 70 miles an hour, you now have 1,400 feet, and you only have 2 seconds to cross. So these are very important things to keep in mind, this relationship between speed and distance. And also I talked earlier about perception and reaction. There's a whole process that takes place, and this is sort of a summary of how one would avoid a collision. And these are the steps that need to be taken to have emergency braking to avoid a collision. And bear in mind again that the vehicle has better opportunity to stop to avoid a collision, and the train, it's a little bit more difficult because of its size and speed of operation. So this is it. First you see a vehicle, and the vehicle becomes visible, so it's detected, and there's a perception. And when the vehicle and train is seen, the operator sees the vehicle or the train in its path, and there's a detection and perception, and this goes on until there's a point where either the train operator or the vehicle operator brain is fully recognized that there's a point where the vehicle and the train are going to be meeting, and that they need to operate, and the operator needs to initiate an emergency braking, and this action and reaction can take from anywhere from a second to several seconds. As you saw in the previous diagram, they suggest that 3 seconds should be allowed for this decision process. Even if we have the right process where we perceive and then we are able to react, this does not guarantee that a collision will be avoided. Failure or delay in any of the steps that I previously mentioned could result in a serious tragedy. And the perception and reaction, of course, is affected by the operator's lack of experience, misinterpretation of information, an error in visual performance, for example, not being able to fully understand the speed of a large object, fatigue on the part of either the train operator or the vehicle operator, and of course many other situations. Again, reaction time is just how fast one can detect an occurrence and initiate a response. And in this case, we're talking about either the vehicle operator, the pedestrian, or the bicyclist. In the case of and the train operator. In the case of the pedestrians can stop instantaneously almost, and can respond in fractions of a second and make a correction. Bicyclists take a little bit longer, but a vehicle requires more time, and of course, the train might require even more time. Everything takes time. And most of the information about reaction times are based on laboratory experiments and very good laboratory experiments, but are not based on totally based on field observation, although there are some. It's mostly simulation studies and mathematical theorizing. Excuse me. Train applying emergency brakes. Usually when a train operator is interviewed after a collision, the train operator states that the train was placed into emergency braking the instant that the operator observed the vehicle or the pedestrian. And based upon the previous discussion about perception and reaction, we now know that it's impossible for a train operator to respond to a situation without having a perception-reaction time. The train operator has a very difficult job, must interpret information, constantly recognize situations, make important decisions, oversee the operation of the train, and anything that reduces his or her ability to perform could serve as an antecedent to a problem or an error. Any antecedent will increase the reaction time and will interfere with cognition and limited abilities in other ways as well. And the quality performance that can be impaired, which is needed, of course, to function safely. So all the things that an operator has to do, you can see that to function safely is not one simple process. What the operator has to do is they have to apply attention. They can't divert their attention by using their cell phone or chatting. They have to apply their attention to the task at hand. And how many tasks can a train operator do at one time? That's a big issue. And what the task is they should do is be concentrating on operating the train safely. And how rapidly can a train operator switch from task to task is a big question. And how widely can the train operator deploy attention across the visual field? These are very big questions that have have not quite been addressed as yet, and whether or not the operator can deal with more than one task at a time through multitasking, and what is their ability in terms of observing the field ahead. Just to give you a little summary about the train operator and safety, the train operator has to focus on watching the right-of-way. He or she observes the right-of-way, needs to observe the track ahead, determine if there are any obstructions or incursions onto the right-of-way, such as vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, and they need to be prepared to expect the unexpected. It's been, from studies have shown that train operators usually operate in a predictable and lawful manner, but things can interfere with that, such as a long, hard working day, getting tired at the end of the day, losing focus, lack of emergency training. Some train operators, train companies, trade organizations now have introduced simulation training to give operators more experience in terms of emergency preparedness. And memory, after an accident sometimes the memory can be faulty. Memory depends both on what actually happens and how one makes sense of what has actually happened. And it's been experienced, and of course, most of you have seen the movie Rashomon. If you have four people, you ask four people to tell the same story, you'll get four different versions of that story. The only memory that is really 100% reliable is recorded memory, and it's also important that those involved in an incident immediately document that information. Some of the human errors that have been reported over the years in terms of accidents at crossings are lack of attention, perception, the ability to see or hear a specific feature. A lot of people who have been involved in crossing accidents say they never heard the train. Knowledge, inadequate or incorrect knowledge for a particular task can result in a collision. Violation of rules, regulations, laws, procedural errors, using the wrong procedure in a given situation, a slip or a lapse where an unattended action takes place, fatigue where there's tiredness or fatigue influencing behavior. These are not strictly limited to the train operator. These can also be applied to the vehicle operator as well. Operator must have some attention control because they must monitor multiple information sources over an extended period of time. They need to learn to allocate resources by shifting attention by the relative importance of the activity, such as crossing a grade crossing. Even when attention scanning capabilities are well tuned, it is important that the operator be prepared for the unexpected, infrequent, or high priority events. One never knows when one is going to be faced with a dangerous situation. And in terms of a simple little buzzword, the best way to have safety is by design, and the pathway to crossing of the tracks are a critical element in the design of a safe crossing. And the safer the crossing is designed, the better chance there is that those who cross that crossing, be it vehicle or train, will do it safely. And the first level of accident prevention is removing the hazardous condition in the first place. There are a lot of tools out there that help in making crossing safe. These standards and practices, unfortunately, in some cases are based on consensus, which is in many cases a minimum rather than a maximum condition, because the various standard committees that are out there require all participants to agree on that standard. I serve on several standard committees, and I'm constantly voting. And in the end, to get a consensus vote, one has to sometimes compromise the ideal safety situation. And of course, because of this consensus process, and because sometimes the standard group has not taken up the subject, not all situations are covered in the standards and practices. Some of the standards that are out there that are very useful, and one of the major ones is the American Public Transit Association standard. Excuse me. This standard is called Rail Transit Grade Crossing Warning System, Design Criteria, Installation, and Operation, and this was developed primarily with personnel from railroads and consulting firms, and this is what the standard basically covers. Another standard that the American Public Transit Association has is Rail Transit System Highway Railroad Grade Crossing Warning Device, Inspection, Testing, Maintenance. It's very important that these devices operate effectively, and if there is failure, that an immediate attention is given so that crossing is brought up to safety standards immediately. The federal government, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration has developed a crossing handbook, and this is a best practices handbook, as well as, and it also includes discussion of the adopted standards for highway railroad grade crossing. This is a fabulous publication, provides information on crossing environments, the physical conditions, improvements that can be made at the crossing. And it's free, and it's available by just going to the U.S. Department of Transportation website. It's usdot.gov, and you can get a copy for free of this document. The second document that's produced by the U.S. Department of Transportation in cooperation with many professional organizations, and this is a standard for the design and placement of traffic control devices, and there's several sections that are devoted exclusively to railroad crossings. And this also is available from the U.S. Department of Transportation website at no cost, and is a very useful document. Some of the factors that engineers have developed over the years in order to reduce accidents is driver safety programs, is make the locomotives more conspicuous by adding various lighting and reflective tapes, and also now various trains have numerous lights all over them to make them conspicuous as they approach the crossing. Having a good program for crossing maintenance, reliable motor vehicles, sightline clearance, which we talked about. Of course, the one sure guarantee that there will be no crossing accident is eliminating the crossing in the first place, and that's crossing consolidation. or grade separation. Warning devices, device upgrades at intersections have proved very effective. Education and enforcement of vehicle operators, train operators, students, bicyclists, enforcement of the traffic laws, crossing improvements, reflectorizing freight cars. I had an experience, and it's not an uncommon experience, is when you have these tank cars, they tend to paint them black, and with no reflective material, there's been many experiences where cars have driven into these at non-controlled crossings because they're not visible at night. And, of course, pedestrian safety. I have a question from Dale Camera. This question is, what are the technical arguments against an active crossing guard at every grade crossing? I don't think there is a technical argument. I think it's basically a financial argument. Most of the equipment and hardware has to come from some source, and who's going to pay for the crossing guard? The railroad would not be willing to pay for it, and the local municipalities are not willing to pay for it. So I think that if you had a crossing guard, it probably would be very effective, but the question is who will pay for it. And if you need 220,000 crossing guards for 5 shifts, so you would need 1 million crossing guards to maintain the crossings in the United States, maybe even more than that. Again, as I mentioned before, the consolidation, reduce the risk of collision, reduce horn noise, reduce block crossings. Consolidation, when the road is closed, almost assures that there'll be no crossing accidents. And a lot of the reductions in crossing accidents are a result of over 100,000 crossings eliminated over the last 30 years. Somebody earlier mentioned about the crossing. Here's 2 examples of crossings. Both of them are public crossings. The one on the top is a modern type crossing using inserts, sometimes rubberized, sometimes asphalt, and the one below is the timber crossing. And you can see what happens with the timbers. They get beaten up by the vehicles crossing, and they're not as well maintained. And this area of concern is primarily between the flanges, as you can see in this drawing. Examples of unsafe crossing areas are where you have incompatible materials with the surface crossing of the surrounding roadway, where you have an asphalt roadway which goes into a timber crossing, rough and unstable surfaces, horizontal misalignment of the track and roadway, vertical misalignment of the roadway, inadequate crossing width, and the presence of nearby roads or railroad operations that distract the driver. In order to make crossing safer, 2 types of warning systems are applied. One is passive, that's signs and marking. The other one is active, where the devices are light, gates, etc. Some of the warning signs that you'll see in the MUTCD manual, these are some examples of some of the warning signs. Also, I mentioned the crossbucks. And there's various types of crossbucks. There's some with yield, or some with stop signs, and some of them indicate the number of tracks. These are just some examples of that. Where you have multiple track signs, one has to be aware that there's a possibility of multiple trains arriving at the crossing simultaneously, and there have been numerous accidents where one train went by and a vehicle or a pedestrian or a bicyclist proceeded to cross, and another train proceeded in the opposite direction. Advanced warning signs, such as these, which show the crossing in relation to the roadway, in this case, in terms of left. This is an typical advanced warning sign from the MUT manual. It informs road users that they are approaching a railroad crossing, Important at crossings are where visual obstacles and roadway geometry can obscure motorist view, and it's important that people become aware when they're approaching crossings. Another type of information that's provided is the pavement markings, and here's an example of the pavement marking with the advanced crossing and additionally an advanced warning light as well. There are also regulatory signs, which are more than warning signs, and these are signs that give additional information in terms of, you know, what to do, what the vehicle should do as they are approaching a crossing. In some cases, there is a stop sign. The vehicle has to stop and prior to crossing the track, and to look and to see that there is no train that is arriving at the crossing. This is just another head to the crossing. Here you see the pavement marking and the railroad sign. And this is especially important, as you can see here, there's a lack of sight distance. This is another interesting situation. You want to make sure you have a crossing that doesn't divert the driver's attention, and that crossing should not be, as this one shows, on an angle. That should always be at 90 degrees, and that the roadway should not be more than 3 inches higher or lower from the top of the rail. And you can see from the sign on top that there's a hump, and there's a danger that a vehicle could be trapped at the top of the crossing. And of course, this goes without saying that one should never stop on track. Matt, is there any questions at this time?
Yeah, we do have one or two. If you're in attendance and you have a question for Dr. Berkowitz, please do use either the chat or Q&A feature to submit them to us. I guess the first question I have is, are crossings on private property free from federal regulation?
Yes, they are. On private property, there is usually an agreement between the railroad and the private property owner in terms of how that property is, that crossing is marked. But it's free because there is no federal monies involved, and it may not be free of state regulation. The states may, or the local municipality or the local jurisdiction may impose some kinds of safety standards for that crossing.
So, on a follow-up to that, who then regulates the private crossings, or is it an agreement between the railroad operator and the owner of the private crossing?
That's generally the case. It's an agreement a contract agreement between the railroad and the property owner. You can see that that's not the best solution. Well, it's also to bear in mind that the Federal Railroad Administration has less than 1,000 employees, and they are responsible for 220,000 crossings, hundreds of thousands of miles of railroad track, maybe railroad cars. 1,000 people can't do a heck of a lot. I would probably guess that any insurance company has more adjusters than the Federal Railroad Administration has inspectors.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions in the queue, so why don't we continue on with the presentation?
Okie doke. This is some of the signing that you'll find at private crossings. This is a list of some of the active control devices. I'm not going to read the list, but you can see that there are a great deal of different active control devices, and we'll talk about a few of the more important ones in the next few slides. But there are various ways to control in an active way crossings. One of the things to keep in mind, even with active control, that acceleration and deceleration after preemption, when the train passes a point on the track when the active signal is activated, if the train speeds up, the train could arrive sooner than expected, and if the train slows down, of course, later than expected. So there are various computational variabilities in the operations of crossings and the equipment. Also then, there's the issue of what if the train enters or approaches from a siding or a spur, which may not have an active or preemption control device. And of course, some equipment has lag time, and then there's the issues of combinations of passenger and freight trains operating on the same track at different speeds. These all can affect timing. Constant warning systems are capable of detecting train speeds and also capable of comparing distances to predict their arrival. Signals are operated at a predetermined time, and there are legislation out there which sets minimum time standards and how to calculate these predetermined times. And now there are motion detectors that are being applied, and these are also having a benefit to safer crossings. The federal regulation that deals with that time sets a minimum time of 20 seconds, but typically we find that crossings have 30 to 35 seconds. And warning times can go up as high as 40 to 50 seconds. And what they found, in fact, I'm dealing with a case in Baltimore, because the time was so great in this particular crossing, the time ran about 2 minutes, that truck drivers had a habit of not observing the bells and flashing lights, because they would see the train sitting in the station, and then they would cross into an industrial park. And what they failed to realize that there was a train coming over the hill in the other direction, and you can imagine what happened at that crossing. In order to reduce some of the activities where people go around the gates, in many crossings now they're putting in what they call long-arm gates, which cover 1.5 times the roadway, go into the second roadway. They basically cover 3/4 of the roadway and have an effect of discouraging gate driving around, which is not an uncommon situation. Here's an example of a truck. Actually, this was not staged. This is an actual picture, and there's a diagram showing what the truck actually did. In this case, the truck drove around the gate, and this is not a good thing to do, but it's not uncommon. One of the ways to stop this kind of behavior is by putting in medians. And here you see an example of a median that was put up to the gate to prevent drive around. Another thing that's also used is what they call the four-quadrant gates, where gates are installed in all quadrants. And this also prevents driving around, and also gives some visual constraints, inhibits traffic to better behavior. One issue that faces designing a crossing, or we have these close left and right turns, and what is being done in some crossings is installing these left and right turn signs to advise drivers not to make that left and right turn, that it's dangerous and that a train is approaching. There are numerous pedestrian solutions, and these are examples of some of them. Most of them involve gates or lighting systems. If you look in some of these pictures, you can see that they use signage and gates and a combination of things. In this picture, we show some other additional treatments, such as mazes, where pedestrians have to go through mazes. Or in the second line, second picture from the left, you can see that there's a flashing light signal that's installed to warn pedestrians, as well as that has a bell, and that has been installed in numerous systems around the United States. In addition, there are pedestrian warning systems and gates that are exclusively for pedestrians, and flashing lights that are exclusively pedestrians. And sometimes they're in combination with vehicle gates as well. One thing to keep in mind, that when a train is crossing the track, that the width of the track is not the dynamic envelope of the track, that the train extends over the track, and you can see in this case that it extends over significantly beyond the track, and that needs to be kept in mind. Here's an example of the conspicuity lighting systems that have been applied to trains to make them more visible. You can see strobe lights and reflective materials and ground lighting and ditch lighting in order to make vehicles and pedestrians able to better see the crossing. There's various types of preemption that are being used. There's simultaneous preemption and advanced preemption. I'm not going to get into it since we're running a little bit out of time. But this helps in controlling the intersection and making it safer. There are standards that have been set for preemption, and these are the standards that have been set by the federal government. These are some of the issues that need to be taken into consideration in planning preemption for a crossing, such as storage space, traffic volumes, the rate that vehicles dissipate from the crossing, signal intervals before the crossing, queuing left. You don't want to have a queuing where the next traffic light causes vehicles to be trapped on the railroad crossing. And one of the ways of improving on and ensuring that vehicles do not get caught in the crossing is have a pre-signal before the crossing signal. There are also technologies that are being developed where the information about the crossing is displayed in the vehicle. And here you see an example of an in-vehicle display of showing that a train is approaching the crossing and warning not to make that crossing. In order to ensure more enforcement, one of the systems that is applied is photo enforcement. ITS sensor devices. This one was developed by the Japanese, the Fujitsu, and is being tested where objects such as people, cars, bicycles, wheelchairs are identified, and the train operator becomes aware of that. Mr. Kramer asked the question, will the design for high-speed train systems that the government is proposing avoid at-grade crossings will avoid all at-grade crossings? I'm hopeful that that's the case, but some of the drawings and plans that I've seen, it looks like they will be, even though there'll be high-speed trains, they're not as fast as some of the European train speeds, and they might very well be at-grade crossings that have to be dealt with. There are motion detection systems that are being tested out there to determine if there is something in the right-of-way to give the train advance warning. And there are collision avoidance systems that are being tested both on trains and road vehicles to try to give more heads-up information to prevent crossing accidents. There are also gates that have been developed that will hold the vehicle back from 40 miles an hour and prevent vehicles from crashing through gates, which happens from time to time. There's a very interesting thing that's taking place in Australia. They have crossing schools, many of them across Australia, where young people are taught at these schools how to safely cross railroads. And this has had a significant impact in reducing young pedestrian accidents at crossings. There's an interesting type of gate that's used in England. This is a very obvious gate, and they use these gates both for vehicles and for trains. As you can see here, that the gate here is used to stop the train. We don't have that in the United States. Trains are stopped by track signals, which allow them to proceed or not to proceed. But here they actually physically stop the train from crossing. These are some antiquated crossings, and these are interesting enough. In each case, these were public crossings, and you can see this one to the beach. And in this case, the gate is operated by an attendant. There is a Samaritan organization out there that is trying to train railroads into making their system safer through communications and outreach. And the name of the organization is called the Samaritans organization. And they're stressing stop, look, and listen, and trying to reduce accidents by vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists at crossings. Remember that there's a duty of care. We need to warn drivers of hazards, properly trained personnel, have safety inspections, update design, and provide effective communications. This is a crossing in San Antonio, and where they've recorded a ghost of someone who accidentally was involved in an accident. So bear in mind that this ghost may be traveling and may be visiting other crossings where there have been accidents. So watch out for this ghost, maybe in your neighborhood. And remember, most important, safety, safety, safety. And if you need to contact TASA. We have another question, Matt, from Raymond Ewer.
Sure, go ahead, answer it.
Repeat the name of the DOT publication for highway railroad crossings. It's the Highway Railroad Crossing Handbook, and you can get it at usdot.gov. And just go to the FRA site, and or even just go to Google and plug in Highway Railroad Grade Crossing Handbook, 3rd edition. And it will come up in Google, I'm sure. Are there any other questions?
I don't see any other questions in the queue, so I'll wrap things up here. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Dr. Berkowitz. He's obviously put a lot of time and effort into the slide deck and to the presentation, and for that we are very appreciative. I thought the presentation was great, so thank you. I'd like to thank all who attended today. I hope that you found this information informative and can use it as you prepare for your cases involving railroads here or in the future. As Dr. Berkowitz said, if you'd like to get in touch with him about a case or some other matter, you can contact us here at TASA. Our telephone number is 800-523-2319. I will be sending out a link to the archived recording of this webinar tomorrow morning. In that email, I'll also include a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that was used during today's program. The archived recording for the webinar will be placed in the TASA Knowledge Center, which contains all of our previous webinars that we posted for legal professionals, so I invite you to check those out. And if you have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to email me at any time. My email address is up on the screen, mhyde@tasanet.com. We're always looking for feedback, and we do take everything under consideration and try to make these programs as good as they possibly can be. Otherwise, it is 3:03 p.m. We've had a great presentation, and I guess it's time to end the program. So look for an email from me tomorrow morning with the links and the PowerPoint, and if you have any questions or comments or would like to speak to Dr. Berkowitz, please be in touch with us here at TASA. On behalf of the entire TASA team, I thank you for your time and look forward to seeing you at future events.